there, the chat box. Ah. All right, gentlemen, we are live for the very first episode of Arise, the Honest Man's podcast. And with me is Jai Jagannath, Yamuna Bihari, and Kishore Gopal. But just to give a very brief, essential understanding of what this is really about, this is kind of like our descriptive motto. Real men arising to end the silence around us, about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all.
Yeah.
I I made that so dramatic, but like we're really serious about it though.
I like to say that the price for honest discussion is fearlessness. So let's see how much currency we're packing for this particular discussion. So for this episode, we do have a very tantalizing topic around sexual addiction. But before we get into that, we kind of wanted to give a just let everyone know where this is actually coming from. So for the last year or so, we've been doing an initiative, a men's initiative, which we are now calling as sangha, which is an acronym for Sexual Sobriety and Transmutation Sangha. Essentially, it's an accountability brotherhood. So it's intended to be a space where man can, well, I don't like to use this word all the time, but it's intended to be like a safe space where man can openly discuss the vices that embattle them. But more importantly than just being a safe space to talk about one's vices, is also meant to be a place where we can hold one another accountable to doing the things we're supposed to do, to be the sort of man that we can admire. Because one of the big problems that I suspect general humanity, and certainly it faces man, is that we don't have enough internal accountability to manifest integrity on a moment-to-moment basis. And that's not necessarily a fault, but what it does mean is that you require more external, like, features to hold you accountable when you don't have sufficient internal accountability. And so the group is intended to be an accountability brotherhood where we start to hold one another accountable to do the things we know we need to be doing to show up to the world as the man we want to be. And so it's a very proactive group. So a safe space, but also a group to help us stand accountable, not only to one another, but really accountable to our values and ultimately accountable to our Ishta, our deity of worship. So everyone here are members of the satsang group. So I would like to hear from you really quick about your experience with the group, but more importantly, why you think this group was important enough for you to join it.
Okay, who's going to kick it off? Okay, so I'll just go for it. I think that really, in essence, wherever we go, we need to seek community. At least for myself, that is the core principle with which I approach my life. And I feel like in every aspect of our life, whether that is getting ourselves together as a man, or living in a particular place with others who are like-minded, or whatever it may be, I feel that this sense of community is truly important. And as a young 27-year-old man who is trying to establish himself in a very complicated and tumultuous world, whilst at the same time following a philosophy which is pretty much diametrically opposed to what mainstream culture is pushing us to be, one really needs support. And this particular group of men who are coming together in a very like-minded spirit, with a willingness to be vulnerable about the things that we struggle with and the things that hold us back, I feel it's honestly just a priceless asset for all of us. So for me, it's just a complete no-brainer. It's like sustenance, basically.
Nice.
Yeah, I think for myself, just leading the men's ashram for some time with Jai Jagannath, we began to explore these topics a lot, and then to see the necessity of them, it became so apparent quite quickly within our devotional communities, the widespread use of things like pornography and sexual addiction, and just the struggle around all those things. So I think for myself, and I think for many, that when any addiction is involved, whether it be, and I think most men don't frame it as an addiction. They just, because it's normal, they don't frame it as such. But it's not natural to be addicted in such a way. And so it really requires, like Karuna was saying, just community, and to pull us out of that, because to get out of this sort of thing on our own is extremely difficult. And many men that I've personally talked to through my business with Ayurveda, just on a personal note, or through the ashram, have struggled with, 80+% of the men I've spoken to struggle with the same exact thing. And so it's sort of like the elephant in the room, and now we're, broadcasting it live for all of you to listen to and to talk about. And I think it's time that people who are young and at our age can have these sort of discussions, because many of the people, at least within our Bhakti community, there may be a substantial age gap. And also just that the fact that this is the first time in society that there's been a massive accessibility to social media, to pornographic media, to being constantly bombarded, like Karuna was saying, with media that's preying on our untrained senses to sell various products or to sell sex in many different ways. And so I think it's the first real generation that's had to, of course, the kama problem, the lust problem is
eternal,
forever. But the weapons that are being used are now so severe and so massive that it's basically unparalleled, I feel, in history. So I think that to approach it as conscious men that are going to be involved in media, that are going to be involved in the world, but also have very high spiritual ideals that are, from sages hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, I think it's important to have a medium through which we can discuss this. So that's why I got involved and see a huge necessity of it.
Yeah. Discuss and hold accountable. Someone to say, "Hey, homie, what you doing over there?" 11 o'clock at night, you're supposed to be going to sleep. Sure. You're why do you see the importance of this group enough for you to join the satsang group?
Well, I really appreciate what everybody shared. I think it's so hits the nail on the head. Something that comes to mind for me is also the notion of the community, and kind of what causes a lot of blockages in our own progress as people and as devotees is that kind of inner isolation, that all of our challenges that we are experiencing we kind of hold within, and that we kind of suffer in silence, so to speak. So to be able to create this kind of platform, it's kind of like breaking down the walls, because it's like the you can say kind of cry for help is like audible in its silence, in a way that by creating this kind of opportunity for people to come forward and to be able to share their experience with pornography and with these other kinds of addictions, and just seeing how much people's lives are transformed by such a simple thing as having some kind of community to be able to be fully candid with each other, to be able to finally have that opportunity to say, I really need help, and for me, it's like a very noble, a very noble initiative or a step to take, to be able to facilitate others being able to ask for help. And that for me means a lot. It means a lot for me personally in my own journey. and my own kind of progress, and being able to finally reach out for that kind of guidance and support and love, and then being able to create opportunities for other people to access that, for me, means a lot. So I think that's kind of the main thing why I feel like this is such an important and crucial step to take. And also, like Yamuna Bihari is saying, it's like, it's time. I really feel like in our movement, Srila Prabhupada saying boil the milk, this is also part of it, is to really go in and really kind of deal with those things in a very wholesome and powerful way. So
I think I heard this once from maybe Voltaire, where he says there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And it seems like people are starting to wake up to the reality that a lot of men are personally facing. This mantra retreat was started a few years ago with ISKCON within our specific devotional community. So they're starting to wake up to see like more support is required for the men in our constituency. My sense of it is that it's going to take a lot more than a weekend retreat or seminar to really hold us accountable, because the problem is a day-to-day problem, which means the community that we would need access to has to be available to us on a moment-to-moment basis. Otherwise, the problem isn't going to really get solved in just a powerful weekend thing, although that's required as well, but it requires more constant force. All right, so let's get into the topic. We've already started to talk about it a little bit, but let's get into it a little bit more. Sexual addiction. So addiction, the way I like to think of addiction, I think is defined nicely by Arjuna in the Gita, before Krishna kind of gives extended analysis on the karma problem. Arjuna asks the question, by what is one impelled to sinful activity, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? So just the word sinful has a lot of history to it, and it doesn't perhaps convey the gravity. I mean, like, as a 21st century man, when you hear the word sin, how does that register in your psyche? Like, So
that's fine.
my youth.
I often like to, when I'm talking to men about this verse, I like to translate papam, which is generally translated as sin, as counter-flourishing activity. When you're doing something like a sexual addiction, you're not flourishing, nor you're not going up, nor you're able to sustain the state that you're at now. You're just going down. So so why is it we're impelled to counter-flourishing activity, even unwillingly? Krishna says, Anishtanapi, even unwillingly means like it's against your moral compass. Or for people like us, we follow scriptures, and scriptures saying this is not good. So it's against our moral compass to do something. Still we do it. Baladiva, as if engaged by force, which means like you're not really forced to do it. Like, I don't have to look at something like porn, for example, but I do. It's like you're not really forced to do it, but there's a sense where you're forced. So this is addiction. It's really, addiction, if you have to put it in one rubric, it's the loss of freedom. So like any addiction, sexual addiction is a very powerful one, and it comes in many different forms. I think in the 21st century world, promiscuity is a very prominent one that's there. The dating apps is another form, really, I think, of sexual addiction. Codependency is, I think, a particular form of sexual addiction. But the most insidious, corrupting, and degrading one, I think, is PMO. And for those who have never heard this phrase before, PMO means porn, masturbation, orgasm. So it's the most insidious, corrupting, and degrading one, in my view. Do you agree with that? And if so, why? If not, why not? I have my own reasons also, but I'm going to come back at the end.
I would say absolutely. I would say absolutely. I want to hear Karuna, but I'll just say that, the average man sees pornography when they're about 11 years old. So that's the first education that a man will get on the relationship between a man and a woman. and that women love to be, called names, and basically all the things that are displayed within this sort of media is the primary education. And then, the 3 A's of addiction, I'm not super familiar with, the 12-step recovery process for alcoholics, but there's the 3 factors of affordability. Well, it's completely free. Anonymity. Well, you can, basically be anonymous for sure. And then accessibility. It's on every single device. So it makes it like way more so than like a sexual union between a man and a female or whatever it may be, because it's has all 3 of those, and it's very easy. It's very easy and very also unnatural. The sort of messages that are portrayed in these videos and websites is very unnatural. So I think that it's definitely probably the most damaging thing one can do for their consciousness that exists in society, I feel.
Nice. Karuna, you seem like you have something?
Yeah, I think I would really emphasize the artificiality of it, and the just full on, just super illusory nature of what it is to actually be engaging with pornography. Because basically what happens is that, like, every male with a smartphone just has access to his own private harem of, like, unlimited beautiful ladies in all kinds of very, very compromised situations, sexually speaking. And it's just so far removed from what true intimacy is and potentially can be. And when I say that, then I'm speaking particularly about being really respectful of the person that you're intimate with, and really just actually acknowledging them as a human being. Because in pornography, as we all know, women specifically, because most pornography is tailored for the tastes of men, women are just so terribly objectified, and it just completely strips them of their humanity. So this creates sexual scripts which are so deeply etched into the consciousness of young boys who practically grow up on it. So therefore, yeah, that's
Nice. I just want to jump in quickly on that last point, creating these sexual scripts that are very hard to remove even after you become a devotee or some sort of religious person or practicing yogi or sadhaka, basically, practitioner. So I go to Kali often, and there in one yoga ashram, devotee yoga ashram, this couple became devotees, but they own a sex shop. And one day we were having lunch with them, and we were asking them, questions, because we were curious. And one of the questions we asked is that, what is the biggest percentage of clientele that comes into the sex shop? And so they said something like over 80%, maybe even more of their clientele are women. So I was really, really shocked to hear that. And so I said, why 80%, over 80%? How is that even possible? And they said, well, a lot of these women report to us that with their spouses or their boyfriends, that they feel more or less like masturbation dolls, and that their partners don't really kind of see them as persons. And they take it for granted that their partners have feelings for them and so on. But I guess in the after coitus, they feel like I'm just there, and I'm basically existing for the pleasure of the person. And that really blew my mind. And so they have to do extra things in order to feel satisfied, because they're not getting that reciprocation from their partners or husband. I just found that to be very interesting. Just to your point about these sexual scripts become so indelibly written in our psyches that even on a conscious level, we try to relate as a human, but subconsciously we're relating as this person who dehumanizes the other. And you're not meaning to do it, but you can't just get rid of some scars just by wishing them away. And so I think that's very powerful point on how corrupting it is, because it creates these scripts that are very difficult to transcend. Even when you're imagining something, the script that comes in your mind is the script that you're accustomed to, and not the script informed by the person's humanity and so on. So I wanted to share that story because it came up in my head as you were speaking about that. Sure, you got something on this point also?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that kind of those kind of sexual samskars is a really big one. Another thing that I was thinking is also it in terms of our identity. So when we're young, at that kind of young age, we're still in the formalizing stage of our identity, forming our identity and who we are and our values and our principles. So what happens also is that our self-worth, because when we're viewing this kind of content, this kind of activity, and basically what's being shown is that your worth is in how much you can be how to say uh, sexually athletic, for lack of a better word, you know how long you can last, or all these such kind of things. And so that gets kind of filtered into your psyche, and as you're trying to develop your self-worth as a man or even as a woman, you place your worth in these kinds of artificial and superficial standards, which are really non-existent. They're completely fake, and they're so divorced from reality that you begin to exist in this kind of like weird, like just superficial world. And another thing is also that the nature of pornography is that it's very secretive. It's like your own, like Corinne is saying, your own little personal world that you exist in for your own enjoyment. It's extremely selfish. It's for your own enjoyment. You kind of in you, and it's kind of like an escape from real relationships where you have to deal with emotions and stress and arguments and all these kind of things that are natural constituents of any kind of relationship. So you basically get to skip all or over that kind of stuff and just get to the juicy part.
No pun intended.
So your self-worth becomes compromised, and you also become very selfish. And as you're growing up, and the thing is also, you if you have any kind of like culture around you that gives you some kind of principles or values, you start to experience a lot of internal conflict, and that conflict really also nags at your own self-worth in a similar way, that you feel like, I'm doing this thing which I know I shouldn't be doing, or at least you feel it in some way that it's like there's something weird about, something off about this kind of content that you're viewing. And so it just really damages your kind of growth as an individual, and it causes you to kind of self implode, to where you're not, it kind of destroys your ability to seek help and to be able to confide in other people, to be able to be, yeah. So it's very like trying to find the right words. You become very selfish, and you become very internal, and you're no longer able to really uh, uh, give yourself to others. That's another thing. You also become very miserly. And I was thinking that in how there's that sexuality or illicit sex destroys cleanliness, and I was thinking that this also is the cleanliness of the mind as well. So these qualities of like selfishness and miserliness, envy, and things like this, I think also born from that kind of illicit sex, that starts to erode at our values, and so our consciousness becomes very unclean. Now, when our consciousness is unclean, then our the lines become blurred, and we start to be able to we act in all kinds of ways for our own selfish enjoyment that previously we would never have done. And so this is the danger of it, is that it seems like it's not such a bad thing, but it's very subtle in how it starts to erode and destroy our values and our principles that we live by. And so over time, the longer that continues, then it's like we can get to a point that we're just completely divorced from our any kind of like principled life, that's kind of like an extreme, but that's where it heads to, because
Direction is
it's a very
going.
subtle kind of self-destruction, you can say.
It's
Yeah.
interesting how, sorry, it's interesting how, because I think Karuna and Kishore, you're both mentioning this. It brings us into like this secret world that no one should know about, really know what we're doing. On the one hand, on the other hand, and I'm gonna present a Purva Paksha, basically an argument against everything that we're saying, and see how you guys respond to that. But before I do that, it's interesting that on the one hand, it's like the secret world, no one should know what we're doing. And on the other hand, the mainstream world would tell us that this is natural, this is a positive thing. And one of the main arguments that I've heard for porn, oddly enough, I've largely heard this coming from women, interestingly enough. That doesn't mean they're the ones that say it the most, but I personally heard this largely coming from women, that that it keeps men like from doing crazy things because they're at home watching porn. So the contrast I'm going to draw, which I think is kind of interesting, we're told in the mainstream world, this is not bad, this is positive, this is natural for men to do. And then on the other hand, people like to keep it secret, so much so that I've seen people in public looking at porn. At least I can more or less make out they're looking at porn because of the anonymity point that Jamuna brought up. Someone's like over there in the corner of the cafe, got their hat down like this, got the phone like this. And then they got that, that funny little Joker smile on, like the smile that won't go away. So when you walk into the thing, you can make out, okay, this guy's probably looking at porn. But if it's such a positive, natural thing, why does it have to be so secretive? Like, what difference does it make if someone's just watching it like out in the open if it's such a positive thing? Anyway, so I just find that sort of, maybe it's a sort of double think that goes on. Because on the one hand, there's like an intuition that this is a secret world that's not good. And on the other hand, even though we have values that say opposite, in our hearts, we kind of know what the situation is. Anyway, here's my purpose. That I've largely heard this from women. Porn is positive. It brings down rape culture, and it keeps man from doing crazy things.
What? It brings down rape culture.
Bro, this is a genuine okay. Obviously, you don't take it seriously, but when I did the series of talks with Jai Giridhari on his podcast, I did a series of talks on the porn issue, and one person, I'm pretty sure it was a lady, responded with this particular argument, which was an argument that I've heard several times over from porn apologists, if you want to call them that this is helping to keep men, from acting out because they can play out their fantasies in this secret world. So how do you answer that besides laughter? Laughter is not a legitimate argument. What is your answer to such a for Rapakta? It's like people genuinely say these things.
Yeah, I have a very, very legitimate argument against that, and I'm going to drop it right now. By the way, my screen has paused, so I can't see you guys moving, so I hope you can still hear me. Can you hear me? As my audio live. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so there is this incredibly, deeply disturbing interview on YouTube with Ted Bundy, who was probably like America's most infamous serial killer. And essentially what he said was that almost every single man that was incarcerated around him that he knew for perpetrating violence against women, almost every single one of them was deeply involved with pornography, including himself. That was Ted Bundy's dirty secret. From the very beginning of his teenage years, he got into porn. And now what happens with porn? The novelty always wears off, right? So you're consuming a certain level of intensity or like hardcoreness or whatever of porn, but then it's just not enough after a while, and you need more to be stimulated, and more and more and more and more. Where does child pornography come from? How do people end up watching child pornography? because normal porn just isn't stimulating enough anymore. And when anything that we watch on a screen isn't enough anymore, then it turns into real life action. And that's when women get raped. You cannot divorce any argument when we're talking about rape culture, when we're talking about sexual violence against women, when we're talking about femicide. You cannot have these arguments without addressing the reality of hardcore pornography that the majority of men are into.
Yes, I often, when I hear, my initial response to a pervert posture like this is also to laugh. Like, it just seems very naive. And then I always, whenever I've heard it, I always just give the reply, ask your homie what type of porn he's watching and see if he can tell you. Because, there's the idea that, and I'm just amplifying what you just said. There's the idea that it stays vanilla. It's just about watching people have a sort of, I don't think anyone really believes this, but like a loving exchange. I'm like, ask what type of porn people are looking at, because the need for novelty causes you to cross barriers. And once you cross one barrier, it becomes a lot easier to cross other ones. I don't know if you have this experience as a child, but I remember as a child stealing for the first time. And, your heart is like racing. You're looking everywhere like Damodar, eyes are, the police may come after you. You're like freaking out. But then after you successfully steal the first time, when you do it the second time, it's like, okay, that wasn't so bad. And then as it becomes a habit, then you go on to steal without even your heart even flinching. And then you have to go on to bigger steals in order to get a sort of excitement from it. So like with stealing, so with porn, once you cross one line, it's very easy to start crossing other lines. And there's so many suggestions that come up, as we know. You're in whatever realm, Pornhub or this, that, and they're suggesting so-and-so rape. Like I found it interesting that I discovered that rape is one of the top categories of the types of porn that is indulged. So even if someone isn't raping, like suppose I'm watching that, and I'm not a person that rapes. I can honestly say that. I'm not a person that rapes. But if I'm watching that sort of stuff, I'm a person that likes rape. I like the idea of it. And I'm allowing that script to play on in my mind. So what does that say about my character and how that might play out in the future in my relationships with others and so on? So anyway, just amplifying that whole novelty principle and how it comes up. Jamuna, Kishore, y'all got anything on this Purva Paksha? Someone will say this to you. I'm sure you may have heard this before also.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's laughable. I think it's very laughable. And the reason they don't act out is because they have no energy left to do so. So I think merely, I think merely negating the negative is not a step in the positive. It's not like, oh, well, let them be boys, let them be addicted to this very, degrading media. It'll help them to not be into all this other stuff that's bad for them. Like, I don't see that as like the highest option. So I think it's a pretty poor argument. Okay, sure, to some degree it may negate, sexual desire for sure, because if you're expending your sexual energy all the time, then your ojas, your vitality is low, and then you don't really have the energy to do a lot of other crazy things. So sure, I could see it to some extent, but what about utilizing that sort of energy in the positive direction? So that's the sort of question I pose.
Nice. You sure you want to say anything on this? Or we can move on also, but just in case you have something you'd like to.
Just something short, because I think also there are some questions and things that we should also look into. I think that, like you were saying, like the kind of negation, like, well, at least he's not doing this. I think more wholesome than that is trying to develop a healthy relationship of sexuality, because I think that we've kind of gone to the opposite extreme, that like everything about sex is wrong, and then because of that kind of artificial renunciation, then we end up trying to satisfy that natural inevitable desire in so many other kind of secretive and ways. So I think that it seems like things like pornography are kind of an escape from the work that is required. I think in in the material world, there's a give and take. If we want to have enjoyment, there's also some responsibility, karmic responsibility that we have to take with that. So I think that, in committed relationships, ideally, then you have that give and take, that you are able to have that kind of relationship, and then you also have to accept the responsibilities and things that come with that, having that relationship, being accountable to each other, supporting each other, and all the kind of things that come with that. So then there's that give and take. The nature of the Kali Yuga is that we want free everything, free enjoyment, everything for free, without any kind of having to give anything in return. And so I think that's why I also don't agree with this idea, because I think there's not really any kind of responsibility there, or any kind of like that reciprocation. So I think it's yeah. So that's kind of that's my perspective that I've come to over time, is just realizing that it's about accepting the whole package and not trying to just pick and choose what you want out of it, and taking it and it's wholesome with everything that comes with that.
Nice. I amplify that because I had that specifically as one of the reasons why I think porn, PMO, is one of the most corrupting and destructive, is because to do other things, you really have to level up. And for men in the past, even if you wanted to be like living in a degraded way, you still had to level up to some degree to be attractive enough to be able to be in the position where you could enjoy like that. You have to level up. You have to improve your morality. You have to improve your status in order to be in the position where you could have a harem of beautiful women. But porn takes away the need to level up, to improve your character, to improve your morality, and just allows you to waste away in this imaginary world while your real life is just falling apart. So for this particular reason, I also find it to be the most corrupting. I do have another question. I have a few more questions here, and there's some questions in the chat box we want to get to. But this one's a little bit more personal in nature. Not that we have to go into details, obviously. No one wants to hear all that on the live thing, but maybe share our own journeys with porn, but specifically the triggers and the emotions around them, and what you've maybe learned from that, and what you're trying to do now to improve yourself because of what you've learned from that particular experience. Silence. I could kick it off, but someone wants to, you don't have to get too personal here, but I think it'd be interesting for viewers to hear personal stories,
Yeah, I'm totally happy to share, but I'm not going to go first this time because I always jump in first. I want to hear what Kishore says. He's like the silent sage that just always drops the wisdom, truth nuggets at the end. So let's hear from him first. Sorry, Kishore, just totally put you on the spot, bro.
Okay, I'll try my best. I think a big thing for me, especially when I was younger, particularly, was that I had a lot of challenges with my kind of self-confidence. Like when I was I didn't do well in school and things like that, and it was like I hadn't developed my own personal skills enough to see I have some value, in these kind of things. I'm good at this, or I can do this. And so it was in that kind of mind space of having that challenge of that self-confidence not being very strong in myself. Then I think what it was that I basically, it was kind of like an escape from that kind of pain. It was basically I was feeling all of this kind of internal conflict that I didn't know how to deal with, and I didn't know how to express it. Because also I think when you grow up without that kind of father figure, then there are certain, I wouldn't know because I didn't have the experience, but I'm assuming that there are certain kind of skills that you get from having that kind of interaction, just having that person available. Of course, maybe even if you have that relationship, maybe you didn't have a good relationship, I don't know, but I would think that there are certain things that you kind of learn, that you having that kind of dialogue. I'm dealing with this. this is what's going on. So I just didn't have any of those kind of skills. So it was just like I was not only not able to, I was not only struggling with my own kind of self-confidence, but I also didn't have the skills to be able to express that to anybody. And so it was kind of like my kind of way of dealing with that. You know, it was kind of like that escape from that kind of pain. But then it kind of just compounded because I also didn't feel like that was like making me feel very good either. So it was kind of just like this whole, and I think also what happened was that I developed a kind of, how to say, like familiarity with that kind of internal like conflict. You know, that was became comfortable for me, and I the idea or the feeling of like confidence and success became alien to me. And so in that young age, with not having the right people skills and things like that to be able to express myself, it was kind of just like my way of like feeling comfortable. Like this was something that I felt kind of like I was in control of, you know, that I was able to kind of, it gave me a sense of like how to say, proprietorship. You know, I choose what I want to see and things like that. And so it kind of satisfied that kind of hole in my that I was feeling, and that kind of gap of all these kind of other skills and kind of confidence that I was unable to access. So I think that was kind of the main thing for me at that period.
Nice.
Beautifully expressed. And I think what immediately came up for me was that, you know, when we had our men's retreat upstate, just a group of 15 guys, we asked this question to the guys: how many of you had an inspiring or even just a nourishing relationship with your father? And out of 15, one person half raised their hand. And that person, you know, had a devotee upbringing and whatever. And so I think that that's the role model growing up. And I think if there's a lack of a father figure, then we look to TV, we look to other men in society. But if there is, then generally those men will also not be heroes. They will not be so heroic enough to raise a man of complete integrity. So I think for myself, switching gears a little bit, just that for myself, you know, I was probably introduced to it around that age, maybe 11 or 12. I can't remember exactly when, but it was middle school. And it was already like very normal for people in middle school. And I think what perpetuates it is a little bit of what Kishore was saying, that a man needs like things, like a young man needs like things in his life that are like stepping stones and like celebrations and some scars to make him feel like he's transitioning in life into the next stage, and to becoming like the crossing the threshold from youth to manhood, and the level of responsibility that traditionally comes with that, and how basically there's none of that. And so then you look around and you look at, you know, pornography or whatever it may be, and that is the standard. And if you have not had a bunch of sex by the time you're 15 or 16 in high school, you're definitely going to get bullied for it. And I remember I would lie about it. I would lie about it to my friend. I'd be like, oh yeah, oh, you know, whatever. And I'll reveal an embarrassing thing, but that, you know, you feel so much pressure that you can just make up a story like, oh yeah, this person, yeah, totally, I've been with them or whatever. And then my friend contacted that person. And I was like, oh no. This was when I was, you know, maybe 16 or so. But that the pressure builds so much within your consciousness that this is what you need to be, or else you're a total loser. And so it's kind of just like a race to like that status. Like, okay, I need to do it. And like, of course, that's a totally different topic. But I think that the pornography definitely like super amplifies that, that you need to be doing this by this age, and or else you're a complete loser. And so I think it's, you know, a sense of safety, a sense of some sort of relationship with women. If you're not like functionally able to relate with women, especially like when you're 13 or 15, you're not really, you know, traditionally going to be in a relationship at that time anyway. That's the time just for kind of exploring who you are and developing yourself. And so to have that huge pressure is unsettling. So I would, engage in pornography pretty regularly. And I tried to, quit it many, many times on my own. And it like you said, the novelty wears off after some time. And then it just kind of becomes like disgusting. Like Arjuna says in the Gita, like you're attracted to do something over and over again that is not in your best interest or evolution. And so while healthy sexual relationships are, definitely a great step, I've never seen one. I don't have any examples of it. I don't have any heroes who have told me about their nourishing, relationship with their wife or their partner or anything. So all I know is that the more sex, the more porn, the more that you have, that's the idea of success. And so, I would watch it, multiple times a week, and then just got it to the point of disgust of like, I need to stop this. I need to, and then trying on your own. But then that's even that I feel is quite a conscious level of like wanting to stop, because you would tell friends about it and they would think it's ridiculous. Like, why would you want to stop? Like, I love porn or whatever it is. And you wanting to stop seems like in itself like a big ordeal. And so anyways, it's a whole journey trying to do it on your own over and over again and failing because it's so available, it's so accessible, it's so free, it's so anonymous, right? And then just basically, like Kishore was saying, just kind of like, well, I can't live up to that standard. And so just kind of like losing hope about your own self-worth and your own ability to overcome vice. And so the first time that really I got a huge stronghold on it, for good, it's still, work of progress, but for good was when we started the men's sangha. So anyways, not to be long-winded, but that's a bit more of a journey.
No, thank you. I think the personal stories helps people to really understand maybe the extent of the issue. I'm going to jump in here. My story starts at 11 also, like the average person. Middle school, I remember the exact location when I first saw porn. The library of my middle school, King Lab, Pretoria, some guys were looking at some stuff and giggling in the corners. So I wanted to know what they were giggling at. So I walked over there, to see. It was a big huddle of guys there. And then I was like, oh my God. And then I was like, oh my God. I didn't know such a thing was possible, because I remember all these new guys. So computers were kind of internet was just starting to become a thing when I was in middle school. And so I didn't know that such thing was possible. So after I discovered that when I was 11, then it became like a regular affair from middle school all the way through high school. And I didn't think anything of it because, the mainstream culture, I guess, would have us to believe that was quite normal. All my friends were looking at it and so on. And so it didn't really occur to me as an issue until I read SSR. So Science of Self-Realization was my first book. Prabhupada's very heavy about the four regulative principles and, topics about sex, a very sort of Vedantic slant towards sexuality, where it's like very renounce oriented. Renounce oriented. So like kind of strong. And I kind of realized that this is actually a problem. And then I realized that I need to stop, and then I couldn't stop. And so I guess my internal experience is that what started off as a boyish curiosity quickly escalates to the loss of freedom. And then the loss of freedom transforms into despair and demoralization, because I remember going through a process of trying to give it up. And I remember one time, I specifically remember crying like profusely about it after reading Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj's Transforming Lust into Love book, and just feeling myself completely enmeshed in the fetters of this issue. And I was crying about it, thinking that my life is finished. So, what started off as a curiosity turns into the loss of freedom, turns into despair, demoralization. And then I moved into the ashram. Shortly after that, I moved into the ashram about 7 months after I read SSR. 13 years, nothing. I was so rigid in my mentality that I wouldn't even look at porn in my dreams. I can honestly say that. You know how sometimes you have them pornographic level, dreams, and you get a chance to like look at some stuff in your dream, and you kind of don't know that you're dreaming, but you kind of do know you're dreaming, so you take the chance I don't know how else to express that. I don't know if you ever had that experience. And anyway, I wouldn't look at porn in my dreams. I was like very solid, very rigid mentality, kind of very I was on fire. I thought I was like, I'm a pure devotee. I'm going back home with the guy. No doubt. There's no doubt about it. And then after 13 years, I had my transition out of the ashram, which was a very, it was a very tumultuous transition. Not going into the details of it, but because of the sudden nature of my transition, I was left without an identity. You know, because I was identified as a brahmachari, engaging with the world from the perspective or reference point of that identity. It was stripped away from me. I felt extremely resentful about it, and I felt demoralized. So I was dealing with lamentation, bewilderment because of loss of identity, resentment, demoralization, and then all of a sudden, 13 years later, it's like, hi, remember me? Yeah, you thought I was gone, didn't you? No, I was just waiting for that good moment to reintroduce myself. And then all of a sudden I found myself again embattled with this age-old enemy. And it went on for some time, and finally, you know, I started like shaking myself out. But to be honest with you, what really got me motivated to like get on top of the issue after it had reintroduced itself in my life is a friend came to me and shared his own story with pornography. It was a pretty embarrassing situation that he had shared with me. And so that got me wondering, I'm like, is this like an issue with a lot of people? And so I started just asking all my friends. I remember this one particular year, I started asking all my friends, just very randomly, without any preparation on their part. Hey, bro, you look at porn? You know, we'd be talking about like tofu or something. And I was just like, hey, bro, I just want to ask you, you look at porn? You know, when they start stuttering, like, all right, so you know, yeah, this is an issue.
Confirmed.
Confirmed, exactly. And then that's when it really occurred to me, like, wow, this is something that's really affecting, like, all of us. Anyway, it's a little bit long-winded too, but I guess what I realized, because my question is about the triggers and the emotions around it. So I realized that, you know, with sexual addiction particularly, everything is like a trigger. If you get demoralized, it's triggering. If you get, if you feel resentful, it's triggering. If you're stressed, it's triggering. If your partner says something to you, get into an argument, that's triggering. If you're looking at a hole in the wall, that can be triggering. Like when it comes to sexual addiction, everything can be a trigger, which makes it particularly more powerful, I guess, in a way than other sorts of addictions, probably maybe aside from drugs, because everything can really trigger you. And what I kind of discovered about the emotions in myself when triggered in this way is that there was almost a reluctance to like face myself, like to kind of confront my heart, the situation of my heart. And I have this image now that I think of the way I view my heart right now. I view my heart like a wilderness. You know, Krishna says in the Gita, Yadate Moha Kalilam, the wilderness of Moha. And inside this wilderness are like night creatures and loneliness, depression, anger, demoralization. And my soul is like in the middle of this wilderness. And in order for me to like meet my soul, I have to confront the night creatures in the wilderness of my heart. But a wilderness is scary. And so instead of just confronting the wilderness, porn just offers an easy distraction away from that work that needs to happen. And the longer you neglect it, the more the wilderness just expands. And if you keep neglecting it, then the night creatures just start coming out, even without you wanting to. They just kind of like come out and they start to really arrest your progress. So seeing it was happening to myself, but I wasn't really serious enough to get on top of it until I started talking to my friends about it. And I was like, okay, this is actually not even a joke. Like we may crack jokes about it, but this is not a joke. We need to get on top of this and kind of confront the wilderness of our heart and prevail. Anyway, so that's my, general story.
I just wanted to add something to that really quickly, just because I really like what you were saying. And I just remember one of the first times that I ever approached someone and like expressed to them that I was having this challenge. And the first thing they said to me, one of the first things they said to me was, okay, that's, this is not such a nice thing. But they said, but but this is a symptom of something else. This is something else that's going on that you need to deal with. And I remember that being very revolutionary for me, and to hear that and to be like, oh. And that was kind of like started my journey of turning a little more inward to looking at myself and that kind of self-confrontation and being like, okay, what's going on internally? And because there are all kinds of emotions that are associated with, a habit like pornography, or maybe not for everyone, but probably for a large amount of people. There's a lot of emotional triggers like depression and these kind of things. And so that kind of self-confrontation can be very intimidating, and so that moment of like realizing, because when you're focusing too much on, and I think this is something that I want to talk about later in terms of nurturing this Prabhu's question. And so I'll just say something very short. It's just, in my experience, that focusing too much on the problem itself doesn't actually help. Because that's all you're thinking about. But the more that you're thinking about it, the more it becomes stronger and stronger into your mind.
Right.
And then what also happens is that everything is happening in your head. It's all like an internal battle, and so that you're not able to allow others into your kind of sphere in order to support you, because it's all in your mind. So that's just something that I was thinking.
Nice. I want to get to Nishinga's thing too before we end. So, but before we do it, Karuna, you want to share any personal story here?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say though that my screen has been like basically frozen for the past 25 minutes. I can't see you guys at all. Can you still see me? Am I still visible?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. That's great, because I'm happy listening to you. All right. So for myself, I think initially it was really just because somehow or other in the schools that I went to and amongst the the young guys that I associated with, it was never really such a spoken thing. It wasn't actually something that we kind of like shared with each other, that we were into it or anything. It was just kind of like everyone's guilty pleasure, but it really wasn't spoken about. So except when it was first discovered, like sort of at the age of 12, 13, then it's, it's like puberty just begins and you just become so curious. It was really just a case of curiosity. Like, what is this entire realm of like human experience that I'm only just becoming aware of and also becoming conscious of within myself. And so initially it was really just curiosity. And then, obviously it's like when you're a kid, then your sense of morality is just completely underdeveloped, and whatever is pleasurable is just kind of like, that's just what goes. So, during my teenage years, it was kind of like, yeah, it was just a completely normal thing, because why not? Like, why not? Why would I not look at like limitless, beautiful women having sex? Why would I not do that as like a teenage kid? So it was great, like for my morally underdeveloped teenage self. But then yes, eventually, as Yamuna also said, like eventually it just kind of starts getting so artificial, and it kind of starts getting disgusting. But then more is desired, because it's not, and then the more disgusting it becomes, the more stimulating it becomes. Luckily, I can honestly say that like somehow or other I managed to not go that deeply into it, because basically just at the time when I started to become really disillusioned by it and really kind of like disgusted by it, was the time when I discovered spiritual life and when I discovered Krishna consciousness. And that, that initial immensely blissful experience and all the mercy and the grace that one receives at the beginning of spiritual life, just, it just completely extracted me from any real like super intense gross sensual desires. And I was just kind of carried by that. And I was also in the ashram for some time, and I was really like very peacefully, happily engaged in the lifestyle of monkhood. But then, sometime later, like over a year later, I just somewhere or other one day was I think, and I think I'm gonna hone in on the anonymity factor, because it's like you can engage in this addiction in just such an anonymous way. You just need to be by yourself, even if you're like locking yourself up in a closet. It's so at some point I was just kind of like, I never did that, by the way. It was never necessary for me. Like I always had a room. There was always some room that could be used, but like still, one day I was just alone, and I was just feeling particularly Jai, as you said, we're this dark forest of the heart, and we have these dark shadows that we need to deal with. And I was just overwhelmed by negative emotions, and it was just kind of something that I started dealing with. And I also want to introduce the idea, because I do feel that this is universally true, is that sexual addiction, I feel it's pretty much a lifelong thing, and it's something that you can gain control over, and something that you can consciously keep choosing against, especially when you gain momentum and it begins, you start getting practiced at controlling yourself, sure, but the thing is, it's always going to be dormant. It's always going to be dormant. And if your circumstances change badly enough, like, there's always danger of relapsing back into it. So even in more recent years, it is something that would happen intermittently whenever I would find myself just in a particularly like acutely emotionally disturbed state of being. I am the kind of person, I just really feel everything very intensely, and sometimes I just become overwhelmed by life, and it's kind of an escape. But these days I've pretty much gained control over that particular let's say like trigger for indulgence, being overwhelmed by negative emotions. Like it's been some time since the last time that it's happened, but up until then, it more recently just kind of became something of, it would actually happen in a very specific context. And we had a little men's group, and I wrote a little spoken word piece about it, but I don't think this is the appropriate audience for that. So but it's just a very particular context, and sometimes I'll just be super straight about it. Like I literally wake up in the middle of the night being completely, utterly overwhelmed with sexual desire. It just comes, and it completely overwhelms me, to the point where I'm literally like, my eyes are like saucers, and I'm like staring at the ceiling, vibrating. That is what happens. And it's like, and then it's kind of like, okay, either I'm gonna keep losing sleep for like the next 3 hours before this maybe somehow or other subdues, or I'm gonna let it out and go to bed so that I can get up in the morning and chant my rounds. So that's kind of the thing. It's like, yeah, sometimes the desire just becomes too much, and a release is required, but that still, like, that's not an excuse. Like, we still shouldn't go that far to indulge in that way. And my essential conclusion is that whenever I am really productively, dutifully engaged in a very uplifting personal mission in life, and whenever I'm basically just doing what I need to be doing in my life, and I'm sufficiently absorbed in meaningful things, then this whole thing becomes completely subdued. So I think it's just about being, well engaged.
Yes.
Yeah.
I got a couple more things before we end, and we want to get to Nashina's question, but I just wanted to amplify a couple of points that you brought up. The first point, I really appreciate you saying that this is a lifelong issue. Whether it's a sexual addiction or it's addiction with anything else, it is actually, in fact, a lifelong issue. And when to speak of lifelong, it is multi-life issue. Because at least for Krishna and the Gita, it's the eternal enemy of the soul. So at best, it seems to me from that description in the Gita, we can quell it. We can quell the issue by various techniques and so on. It can be quelled, but it cannot be transcended unless we actually discover the self that is beyond matter. And that is Krishna's concluding point in that whole sort of explanation on the common issue in the Gita. If it is to be ultimately conquered, so to speak, he calls Arjuna Mahabao, mighty arms. You have big arms to fight the enemy, but can you deal with this one? If you want to really conquer it, it only happens when you encounter the self that is beyond matter. So we have our work cut out for us. In the meantime, so long as we're not encountering ourselves and encountering God, then we can at best hope to quell it. And more than quell, I like to use the word harness, because as someone also mentioned this earlier, I think you mentioned this earlier, that it's not like you can be a playboy having a lot of sex, or you can be like the strict, rigid Hare Krishna, you're only going to be having sex with the children, or you can be a PMO addict, but in all cases, you will not be satisfied. So unless we figure out a way to like harness this energy in such a way that it's in harmony with our actual goal in life, then we have a problem. And that's what we want to figure out how to do. How do we harness this energy in a way that is constructive and it can move us toward our actual goal of discovering the self and discovering God? So I just really appreciate you bringing this up. This is a lifelong issue. So it's not something you have to feel guilty about, which would be something we'll talk about in future episodes. Like, you know, oh man, I struggle with this suddenly. Like, yeah, duh. Now that is like going away because we had a few victories 2 years ago. Like, it's there. So I really appreciate you bringing it up. But I just wanted to get to the last of the Steamer's question and our question for this episode. Am I a bad yogi if I like porn? So in the context of this question, I wanted to share a quote, and it kind of relates to what we're saying about discovering the self and discovering God within. But this is a quote from a book, Karuna, you had suggested to me to read. I started reading it. It's got some really interesting ideas in the beginning. The rest of it, you know, I got to get over my feet because I got to start the training. But there's this one quote. I'm just going to read it to you. The name of the author is, how do you pronounce his name? George
Feuerstein.
Okay. So he writes this thing about addiction, which I really, really, really appreciate it. Tell me what you feel about this definition. He writes here, actual sexual addiction, like nicotine, alcohol, or drug addiction, is simply a more exaggerated and therefore more conspicuous version of the same basic disposition to settle for short-lived thrills of the nervous system, rather than a penetrating transmutation of ourselves that attunes us to the larger reality and fills our body and minds with the bliss that passeth all understanding. I just think that's a really amazing way of talking about addiction. Shall I read it again? I want to read it again just because it was very powerful. And
yes.
After I read it 3 times, that's like the standard if you really want to emphasize something. We're going to just do it twice. I'll read it again. Very powerful definition of addiction. Actual sexual addiction, like nicotine, alcohol, or drug addiction, is simply a more exaggerated and therefore more conspicuous version of the same basic disposition to settle for short-lived thrills of the nervous system, rather than a penetrating transmutation of ourselves that attunes us to the larger reality and fills our body, minds with the bliss that passeth all understanding. Very, very amazing. I feel like this echoes what Krishna is telling at the end of his chapter 3 about encountering the self in God. Instead of confronting our shadows, confronting the wilderness and the night creatures within, and discovering God in ourselves, we just settle for some cheap thrills and allow that settling to degrade our lives. So in the context of this definition, I'm going to look at Nishinga's question too, but I'm going to put our question of the show to us now. Am I a bad yogi? So the yogi here is a generic rubric for sadhaka, practitioner, religious person, spiritual, whatever. If I like porn or, engage with porn or indulge with it, like is also a rubric. It can mean a lot of things. But am I a bad yogi if I like porn? Because I think this is fundamentally one of the questions that, say, members of our own community will struggle with. That they, quote unquote, like doesn't mean they like it on a morally speaking, but they're, addicted, or we're engaging with it every now and again. So I like it to some degree. Am I a bad yogi if I like porn? What is your answer to someone who's asking this question to you?
I would say no, because I think that the idea that I'm a bad yogi or I'm a bad devotee, it perpetuates the habit. Because the thing is, in order to sustain a bad habit or some negative kind of activity that is very damaging to our success, it requires a particular kind of consciousness. It requires lack of self-worth. In my experience, you think poorly of yourself, and therefore you don't feel so. You feel more, how do you say, like able to engage in such kind of activities. It's because you, and I mean, I guess I can only speak from my own experience, but I would, it's like when you live a life of your principles and values, there are obviously then necessarily activities and things that you don't engage with because it's against your values. When you're at that low point, in order to kind of access, so to speak, these kinds of activities which are not in line with your values, you have to. It's like the kind of prerequisite, to the action is thinking, feeling, willing. So you're thinking about yourself in a particular way. You're feeling about yourself in a particular way, and that kind of negative self-talk, that kind of negative self-connotation, and thinking of yourself as, I'm not worth anything, or it doesn't really matter. Nobody really cares about me anyways, or all these kinds of mental talk, whatever. It's like that kind of gives us the feeling of like, oh, then it's okay, because I'm dealing with so many things and I feel so bad about myself, and it's okay to do these kind of things. So I think that when we tell ourselves that I'm a bad devotee, it kind of gives us license to continue without any kind of, qualms about stopping. Because it's like, well, I'm a bad devotee, so therefore I might as well continue because there's no hope for me, or whatever our kind of, mantra that we're telling ourselves. So I think that is kind of, and it's a type of escapism as well. That it's much harder to build my own self-worth and to build my life of success, to build my life of esteem, and build that stability in my life, to come into my own talents and skills, to embrace my responsibility. It's not such an easy thing. It's easier to just say I'm a bad person and therefore I don't need to change anything in my life because I'm a bad devotee. And so it's a kind of, in one sense, it's a kind of cheating of ourselves. We're cheating ourselves by accepting these kinds of false narratives, because we understand that we are, Jiva Supar Krishna Nityadas. We are all Krishna's servant, or children of God, if you will. And our worth is much more than that. If the Jiva is part and parcel of Krishna, who's Satchidananda. So we are in one in quality with Krishna. So the acceptance of such kinds of narratives is the direct negation of everything that we hear from our Bhakti Shastras about what our identity is. So it's kind of like the ultimate self-cheating, that you're walking away from your identity in order to engage in these kind of activities that are satisfying for a very minuscule part of ourselves. And if you really think about it, because it's like the material creation is 1/4 of the total creation. It's such a small part. So in a similar way, all these kinds of like darkness and obviously, our conditioning is so large in one sense because we've been conditioned for who knows how long. But in the context of Christian consciousness, our identity as devotee, as bhakta, is so much more than our identity as just like a struggling, conditioned nonsense. So when we start to embrace that identity more, it requires letting go of these kinds of negative mantras that we tell ourselves, because those are the kind of keys into the kind of enjoyment. If we're feeling that kind of confidence, then it's outside of our range. We're not allowed to engage in those kind of things, because we're keeping ourselves to a certain standard. But in order to engage with that kind of things, we have to let go of that self-worth. It's basically forfeiting your self-worth. That's basically what it is. So I think that, yeah, I don't think it's that you're a bad devotee. However, it's like there's also a kind of like, to say, like, there should be some sense of urgency, in approaching how to step out of that kind of darkness. And I think that if we don't take the initiative to kind of step out of that, or at least to reach out, because it's hard to like really say like you're a bad person if you do that, because the thing is, if the mind, when we're trapped in the mind, it's just so like, we all know what it's like to be trapped in that kind of darkness. It's very, very difficult to get out of it. And when you develop that kind of familiarity to that state of mind, then you also feel an unwillingness. There's almost an unwillingness to relinquish that, because now you've become familiar with it. So it's very hard to make a cut and dry statement about it, because it's like, we all know what it's like. I know what it's like to be in that kind of mind state. It's just completely miserable, and you don't know how to, or in some cases you don't want to get out of it, and so you need someone to kind of pull you out. And one of the main ways that I've experienced is that you get that kind of initial pull if someone says, "Hey, you're worth more than that. You have more to offer. You have more to give." And so I think that for me, it was kind of like, oh, I have something to offer. I have some responsibility to, to my family or whatever, and that sense of worth, that sense of something to give is what gives us that initial kind of like pull out of that kind of darkness. So I think, reinforcing our identity, our positive identity, is what really starts to bring us out of that kind of like mire of
Yeah. Beautiful. Anyone else want to answer this question?
I was going to say, just in relation to Kishore Gopal, that the development of something echoing. Is it echoing on you guys?
Yeah, it's got a little echo going on.
Okay, so yeah, I remember hearing Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj say that someone was asking, why is it that a lot of devotees stay within Anartha Nivritti? And he was basically saying because there's not sufficient community to encourage people to move forward with their bhajan when they are facing some problem in their life. And to reveal in a private setting that this is what I'm going through, I need assistance, please help bring me up, right? And so my answer to the question would be that, are you a bad yogi if you like porn? I would say no, but you should have sufficient desire to rectify and to, in the future, not desire it. Okay, now I desire it, but I should have sufficient desire that in the future, I want to not desire it, right? And so this is confirmed also in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 11th canto. I love this verse. It says, Jatashado mat katasu nirvinasarma kamashu veda dugatmakan kaman parityage pyanishvara. It says, having awakened faith in the narrations of my glories, being disgusted with all material activities, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. Even though he is sometimes engaged in sense enjoyment, my devotee knows that all sense gratification leads to a miserable result, and he sincerely repents such activities. So I thought that was beautiful. And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, therefore, although sincerely lamenting occasional lapses into sense enjoyment, in our case, the PMO issue, he never gives up his enthusiasm to serve Lord Krishna. If a devotee becomes too morose or discouraged in devotional service, he may drift into an impersonal consciousness, right? It goes inward, or give up his devotional service to the Lord. Therefore, the Lord here advises that although one should sincerely repent, he should not become chronically depressed. So I just love that there is some form of solace. There is some form of solace knowing that, okay, I have all these disturbances of the mind and occasional lapses into this thing. Whether occasional is very frequent for us or very, sparse for us, there's also moments of experiencing devotion with Krishna in association of devotees, in kirtan, in hearing Krishna's pastimes. And we know the relishment that comes from a genuine opening of ourselves to those beautiful things. And so we know within our hearts that that's what we want to be experiencing all the time, but that there's these lapses. And so Srila Prabhupada recommends that one does not get chronically depressed. One does not consider themselves, like it's a cop-out of the mind, like Kishore Gopal was saying. It's a way that the subconscious keeps us in a lower consciousness. By just saying, oh, you'll never break out of it. You're not good enough. You won't overcome it. Just stay away from the devotees. It's fine. You're not on their level. And I've heard many people, even in our congregation, say, well, the standards are very high, and there's these rules, and there's the 16 rounds, and I feel like I'm not at that level. And so therefore, I'm going to, they went to Vedic meditation or whatever, and Prabhupada says they'll go the impersonal route or whatever it may be, or just become impersonal within and become internal and become secluded and feel like I can't go near the devotees. And it's a way to stay away. So I'll just say that.
Very nice. I'm hearing from both of you. Okay, Karuna, you can go. I'll go last.
No. I just want to say that I feel like Kishore and Yamuna just covered the basis so excellently, and I honestly, I don't actually have much to add to that. I am reminded, however, of this one extract right at the end of one of our favorite books, Aesthetic Vedanta, where Tripurari Swami says that, essentially it is a man's ideal that he should be judged by. It doesn't ultimately matter what you're struggling with right now, but it matters what your vision is for what you're truly striving for and what you can become. And we should never allow our struggles to determine our identity, essentially. So
beautiful share.
Yeah.
Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother, he would often emphasize that. I want to amplify what Jamuna and Kishore said with Damodar Prasad's comment here. There are a lot of comments. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to all the comments. Bhishma, you're seeing the comments here. If you can highlight some of the comments, these can become future episodes for questions that we can't get to now. A lot of these questions require some dealing with. So they can become future episodes. We can even invite some of you guys on to unpack some of these ideas together. But I really want to, Damodar Prasad, for those of you who don't know Damodar Prasad, he's a brilliant devotee. I think he's a disciple of Asheshka Prabhu, but he's been in the manosphere. He's been doing this sort of manosphere work in the devotee community for quite some time, actually. He has a website. I don't know it. I apologize, Damodar. He does seminars, journaling seminars. He has a lot of wonderful insights in this subject matter. Someone that we would definitely like to have on here to discuss some very particular issues. So we'll be reaching out to you soon. But I think Damodar's comment kind of amplifies what I'm hearing from Kishore and Jamuna and my own personal thoughts about it also. He says here, it's not really a lust problem, but an avoidance problem. You have unmet needs like self-esteem or stability in life, and the instant gratification offers a distraction from the pain of that. It's not enough to just resist the habit. You have to identify your unmet needs and take responsibility to develop the kind of fulfilling life that you don't, so much so that you don't need to routinely escape from, right? Krishna consciousness begins from the mode of goodness, so it's not a deviation, to be honest and work on yourself. There may be more to that, but that's all that we're allowed to see. Brilliant comment, and I think hits at the heart of what we're saying. It's not, at the heart of it is not a lust problem, it's a tendency to not take responsibility to encounter our potential. kind of like running away from our potential in a sense. And so you're not a bad devotee. None of us are bad devotees because we have issues. Everyone's got issues. But to run away from your potential, I don't think that makes you a bad person or even a bad yogi, but it will make you a miserable person and probably a miserable yogi. To the degree that we continue our lives running away from our potential, then to that degree we'll feel ourselves bereft inside and tormented by our lack of actualizing that potential. So I really, really, really appreciated that comment. It's been an hour and a half. I really don't know how many people are with us hearing this, but this has been an amazing conversation. It's been an amazing kickoff to our Arise Demands podcast. One thing that Kishore said, and I want to share this again at the top of the stream. Oh, I don't know if it's actually here. So this is, again, this podcast is part of our initiative, our men's initiative called Sangha, Sexual Sobriety and Transmutation Sangha, which is basically intended to help men take responsibility for actualizing their potential. That is the actual purpose of the Sangha. It provides also a safe space to talk about our issues, our struggles with vices. We just had one such session this weekend. It was absolutely beautiful. It was hilarious. It was, in fact, a few people messaged me afterwards and said, thank you so much. I honestly thought I was alone in this issue and I was going to be alone my whole life with this issue. But having come to the Sangha and just to share the stories, he said, I already feel completely uplifted. So it's a powerful thing to have that space to share in that vulnerable way. I know it's the sort of thing that men don't like to be vulnerable, but I was just like, I think it just depends on who you're with. And then I've never seen men not be reluctant to be vulnerable. So if you guys are interested in that Sangha, of course, ladies, sorry, this is for the guys. If you guys are interested in that Sangha, you can give us a follow on Instagram. We have a s.a.t Sangha Instagram page and send us a DM. You can add them to the group and you can come and join that accountability brotherhood. Otherwise, I don't know if it's on here, but we shared our individual socials on there. So if you want to reach out to any one of these individual devotees and get more into the discussions, I'm sure they're happy to spend that time with you and grow together in this way. And thank you all so much for being here. Whoever is here, thank you to Kishore, thank you to Jamuna, thank you, Kruna Avatar. This has been kind of exciting. I was like having dreams about this last night. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I was getting so amped. I was getting so amped for it, and yeah, it's just been so lovely to be with you guys, and I know that this is really just the very beginning. There's so much potential to reach out so meaningfully, and I'm so grateful to be on this journey. Thank you, Jai, for taking such excellent initiative to really get things going, and thank you so much to Boudica for facilitating us. Please also check out Boudica's. I mean, obviously you're on the Facebook now, but yeah, just watch the space, because there's going to be a lot more beauty and meaning that's going to be manifested in this particular space.
Yes. In our future episodes, we'll be getting to some of these questions. I'm trying to cut and paste them now. Christopher Fici had some nice question. Nirsimha has this nice question that we couldn't get to. So I'm trying to cut and paste them now and get to them in future episodes. Thank you all so much again for your participation. And I think we out. Hari Hari.